The sun was just beginning its descent behind the jagged cliffs, painting the desert sky in streaks of molten gold and crimson, and the wind carried the sharp scent of sagebrush and dust across the lonely expanse. A lone rancher, known to the few townsfolk who dared speak of him as Silas Kane, rode slowly along the winding trail that cut through the barren hills, his worn leather hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much, his weathered hands gripping the reins with a tightness that betrayed years of hardship and solitude. His horse, a black stallion with a white blaze down its nose, moved with quiet dignity, sensing the tension in its rider. Silas had spent decades building his life in this unforgiving land, his heart steeled against betrayal, loss, and the loneliness that seemed to stretch longer than the horizon itself. Yet tonight, an uneasy feeling gnawed at the edges of his mind, a whisper that something unexpected was waiting just beyond the next ridge. As he rounded a bend, the sound of muffled cries reached him, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind with a desperation that made his stomach tighten. Silas slowed his horse to a cautious walk, scanning the scrubland below, and there, crouched beneath a gnarled mesquite tree, was a girl, her long black hair falling in tangled waves around her dirt-streaked face, her slender frame shaking with sobs that seemed to echo across the canyon. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with terror and pain. And in that instant, Silas felt a pang in his chest, a recognition of suffering he had spent a lifetime avoiding. "It hurts so much. I can't bear it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the dry leaves. And Silas dismounted, moving slowly so as not to frighten her, feeling the old familiar tug of responsibility that had driven him to rescue lost cattle, protect neighboring homesteads, and defend the weak from the lawless men who roamed these parts. He knelt beside her, noting the bruises on her arms, the dirt embedded under her fingernails, the haunted expression that spoke of horrors too deep for words. "Hey there!" "It's all right," he said gently, his voice low and steady, trying to bridge the chasm of fear that separated them, but the girl flinched back, clutching a torn blanket closer around her shoulders. Silas realized that whatever had brought her here was dangerous, perhaps life-threatening, and that the journey ahead would test every skill, every ounce of courage he had ever mustered. After a moment of silent hesitation, she finally spoke, her voice trembling yet laced with determination. I ran away. She stopped, shaking her head as if the very memory of what she had escaped was too sharp to speak aloud. Silas nodded slowly, understanding more from her silence than her words, and extended a hand, not demanding trust, but offering it. Letting her decide when she was ready, tentatively she placed her small hand in his, and he felt the chill of fear and desperation that seemed to radiate from her very bones. He lifted her gently onto his horse behind him, wrapping one arm securely around her to steady her as the stallion resumed a slow, careful pace down the dusty trail. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long and eerie across the cracked earth, and Silas knew that nightfall would bring more than darkness. It would bring the dangers that roam these lands. After the sun disappeared, as they rode, the girl's sobs softened, and she leaned against him, seeking warmth and protection. And for the first time in many years, Silas felt the stirrings of something he had buried long ago: compassion, responsibility, and an unshakable determination to see her safely through whatever lay ahead. He thought of the small cabin he kept hidden in the canyon, stocked with supplies, far enough from the nearest town that no one would stumble upon it by accident, and he resolved that they would reach it before the night fully claimed the desert. Every step of the journey was painstaking, the terrain treacherous, but neither spoke much. Words seemed inadequate against the enormity of their circumstances. The girl occasionally whispered fragments of her story, about a tribe that had turned against her, about a betrayal so deep that even the thought of returning brought tears. And Silas listened, offering what little comfort he could, never judging, only promising safety. By the time the first stars began to prick the indigo sky, They had reached a small clearing, and Silas dismounted, letting the horse graze while he checked the surroundings, ensuring no threat lurked nearby. He motioned for the girl to follow him, and together they moved toward the faint outline of the cabin, a humble structure of weathered wood and stone, but to the girl it looked like a fortress, a sanctuary, a place where her pain might finally find respite. That night, as a fire crackled and shadows danced across the walls, Silas sat across from her, sharing dried meat and hard bread, telling stories of the land, the harsh winters, and the beauty hidden in the vast emptiness, and slowly she began to lower the walls she had built around her heart. "You saved me," she whispered at one point, tears glistening in her eyes, and Silas merely nodded, understanding that salvation was not just about protection, it was about hope. And he had given her that in abundance. And yet in the quiet moments, as the wind howled outside and the firelight flickered, both of them knew that the true trials were just beginning, that the shadows of her past would not rest, that the Wild West was a place of lawless men, unforgiving terrain, and hidden dangers, and that together they would need courage, cunning, and unwavering trust to survive. Silas Kane, the lone rancher who had once thought himself incapable of attachment, now felt a fierce protective instinct he could not deny. And the Apache girl, whose life had been torn apart by cruelty, began to feel the stirrings of hope, the faint glimmer of a future where pain could be healed, where justice could be sought, and where perhaps, in the midst of a harsh and unforgiving land, they could find something resembling family, something resembling love. As the night deepened, stars shining like scattered diamonds across the endless black, Silas kept watch by the door, every sense alert, every muscle tensed, knowing that the road ahead would be filled with peril, but also knowing that he would not abandon the girl, that no matter the cost, he would protect her, guide her, and perhaps in the process discover that even in the harshest wilderness, hearts could heal, courage could flourish, and bonds forged in desperation could become stronger than steel. And so, under the vast expanse of the western sky, with the desert wind whispering through the canyons, and the fire casting its glow on two weary souls brought together by fate, Chapter 1 closed, leaving a promise of adventure, danger, and the slow, inevitable forging of trust and affection between a lone rancher and the Apache girl whose pain had brought them together in a world that spared none but rewarded the brave. The sun rose over the endless desert as Silas and the Apache girl continued their journey through the rugged canyons, each step forging a fragile bond of trust. She no longer trembled at the wind or the shadows, for Silas's steadfast presence became her shield. By evening, they reached the small cabin hidden among the rocks, a sanctuary from the lawless land outside. Around the crackling fire, they shared stories, laughter, and quiet tears. Pain remained, but hope blossomed. The girl found strength. Silas discovered compassion he thought lost. In the Wild West, they realized that even in a harsh, unforgiving world, love, courage, and healing could thrive when hearts refused to surrender. Their journey had begun in despair, but ended in the promise of a future forged together, unbroken and unafraid.